Alright everybody, this is Ghost. I believe I had a viewer request to go over some background information for a recent System Light games been running for a setting called War in the Heavens. And I think I've tested my mic enough to figure out that it's actually going to work this time. And it should sound pretty even for the most part, though I might turn this music down just a little bit more. Alright, so basically what this is, I'm going to try to keep it fairly short. Just go over all the background information that would be knowledgeable, would be known to players, and also provide some more information on the setting for viewers. So you have to start from the very beginning. Sort of set a brief history here. We'll go over this. So these are some of my handouts, and I'll expand on some of these points as we're going through. So I'll read this. Before the rule of Magnus, the world was a dark place of despair and misery. The Old Ones, a race of unknown origin, ruled over the world in secret. They spread discord and dread among the minds of men, consuming their insecurity and fear, much like a feast. Men died without hope, and rare fleeting moments of happiness were quickly crushed under the weight of despondence. The being now known as the last Old One, for reasons unknown, elevated a group of men and women to godhood. He granted each of them great power, and gave them direction to find and slaughter his kin. One by one, despite their power, the Old Ones were hunted down and destroyed, and thus the world was freed from tyranny. The greatest of these gods, Magnus, thus assumed leadership to the approval of his peers. The age of ascendancy had begun. For a time, Magnus ruled peacefully and fought off threats that still stalked the world. He and Freydis, the goddess of fertility, became paramours and eventually married. The land, first known as Narisika, was birthed from her very womb, piece by piece, to bring together the shattered clans of mankind. She also gave birth to several of Magnus's children. However, all was not well. Magnus was plagued by the fear that a greater threat would come and mankind would need to do their part to survive. Freydis, though faithful and mighty, could only bear one or two children at a time. He decided to spread his mighty seed and have as many bastards with the hope that one might share his ability. Freydis initially accepted this as a necessity, but grew to be bitter and resentful towards his affairs with mortals. Her spite would manifest with botched pregnancies, or barren wombs for those he thought prospective. Freydis and Magnus, once thought to have an unbreakable union, could hardly share the same mountaintop. Worse, the last one's prophecies and attempts to curtail Magnus from his path led to Magnus and Freydis spawning children with great deficiencies despite their talents. This further deepened the divide between the two gods. Freydis manifested this spite in another form by renaming her first child, the land on which men walked, to Gevaldofferofen. The meaning, this meant land of the wolf that prowls in the night, referring to her unfaithful husband's prowling. The final slight that would forever shatter the age of ascendancy was the rise of Turid, a mortal woman who had achieved a mighty doom against a tyrant. Magnus judged her worthy to enter the halls of Magnus Reach as any worthy warrior or leader is due. However, in a move unthinkable, he elevated her to godhood. Freydis, seeing his intention, left Magnus Reach, followed by her children. Magnus, furious, sought to track her down, but was calmed by Turid. As many anticipated, Turid then became Magnus's next wife, and bore him 4 children herself. The age of ascendancy had ended. What followed is called the Age of Uncertainty. The heavens are split, strange happenings and catastrophes have begun to rise in occurrence, and none, not even the wise men, know what to make of it. These times are dark, and hope is in short supply. The world needs legends and stories that will brighten the soul and help them overcome the worries of this age. So I'll sort of expand on some of those things as far as, what questions I think might be asked for this. So the Old Ones, I think it's a pretty clear analog to the Cthulhu mythos, those type of beings that are pretty much just things that are unknowable, incomprehensible, that sort of things, but that they were very prevalent and sometimes very open in their disregard for humanity and their manipulative ways. I sort of have visions of men and women going about their day-to-day business plagued by horrific creatures in the woods during the Age of Darkness, which I had referred to prior to the Age of Ascendancy. Basically, just imagine living your day-to-day with sort of a false hope. Sure, you've got kids, family, but none of it's really yours. Everything you own belongs to something you can't understand. At any moment, if one of these things just wants to crush you out of existence or take something from you, it can, and there's nothing that you as a man can do about it. It's living with the constant uncertainty of, will I be next? Will my family be torn apart? Will we be eaten? It's just it's just having to not necessarily bear the cruelties every day, but more bear the soul-crushing reality that any one such cruelty, or all of them, could happen to you at any time, because you have these beings that are just their intentions are not understood. They can't be comprehended by the average man's mind. So that's sort of what I had in mind for the great old ones. Well, not necessarily great, but the old ones themselves. The last old one is very much, again, an enigmatic figure. His reasons for doing what he did are not known either, but he decided to destroy all his kin. And the best way to do it was to use the instrument of, was to use humans as the instrument of their demise, because why would he act openly against them? He would be killed easily. They'd all just kind of work against him. But with humans as the guys, and using his abilities that he had, using the gods that he elevated, mankind is very ingenious, and giving them the power to use not only the ingenuity, but also their own natural abilities, that ends up being enough. And say what you will about humanity compared to the old ones. While the old ones might be unknowable, great, mighty, all these things, they may not have the tenacity that humanity does, that they just refuse to quit. Magnus, very clear analogs to Thor in some respects, very future concerned and trying to divine things. Again, I'll say that I didn't base much of this off of historical evidence. A lot of this is very loose analogs, and I just kind of plugged in things that I felt would be interesting or add complexity and layers. Their relationship between Magnus and Freydis, very initially starting off very well, and then devolving into petty squabble, and then devolving into full-blown cold dislike, perhaps even hatred in some respects. And it being their union being symbolic of the shattering of the union of peace and mankind and those sort of things, having a lot of symbolism in their relationship, and it's regression, I suppose, from being a very, well, again, what was considered unbreakable to now being sort of the centerpiece for the troubles of the day. Obviously, Kivaldolfr often as a nickname. I was going to initially use it. As you can tell, we kind of stumbled around with that. I'm terrible at pronouncing as well. I thought it would be a very good slight to have included, that she would do such a thing. But most Noricicans, as they are called, refer to their land as Noricica. Noricica obviously being analog to Scandinavia, Viking lands, and that sort of culture. The Noricicans, very same kind of people. Hard men in cold lands, hard times, warriors mostly, very martial people. Obviously on occasion there's some level of royalty among the Jarls, but most people always respect strength. And there is a fair bit of equality in this, as there are Valkyries and things like that, but obviously it's a very might makes right situation, but there needs to be a degree of honor as well, or else it's just men killing men. The pantheon, the gods, they're all very related to. Obviously, I try to take some, whether it's Norse or fantasy, cues to make that pantheon. But there's a lot of analog with the Greeks as well, as there is a lot of overlap in pantheons with, multiple gods and things like that. If you look through history, you tend to find a lot of overlap, because people will attribute things to a certain god. It's like, oh, well, this is the god of X and Y, and there is a lot of overlap between pantheons throughout history, whether or not people. You can kind of see the cues in our history as well. So I kind of took some inspiration. So I'll go through the gods, sort of brief backgrounds on each one. So here's another thing, I'll read straight from this. So Magnus, again, Magnus, the head of the pantheon, mighty as the gods, very physically strong, quick on his feet mentally, but Not considered the smartest god, but he's considered a wise leader for the most part, despite his recent interest in intermingling his blood with common folk. But he is starting to lose a bit of confidence. Some other gods kind of see that Magnus is just trying to indulge himself. Turid, who is Magnus's current wife, was formerly a shield maiden, great beauty and skill, and she basically led a massive campaign against an army of hundreds with only 10 men, and was able to slay the tyrant that she was against at the cost of her own life, but she did succeed, and then she was elevated to godhood. And she rolls with what Magnus is putting down. They both are swingers, essentially, and just kind of get out there and birth gods and do things and have demigods and stuff. She also gave him 4 gods, 4 children. Broki. Broki is the god of tradition and law, particularly of the martial variety. God of war and justice. Very strong. He's probably the second strongest god next to Magnus, but he can be very hot-headed and haughty. As he, again, when you're the god of war and justice, it's hard to think that you're not always right. So he kind of has that going against him. You got Heimdall the Hammerer, second son of Magnus under Turid. He was, again, he's one of the older sons, but he was a younger god when he went to go find a hammer that belonged to the Dwarfir. I'll go more into them one later. They're kind of your dwarves. They were a race of smith and jewelers, and he was bamboozled by some forest spirits, and they basically made him extremely old and frail looking, extremely old looking. I shouldn't say frail looking, but very old looking and heavily aged. So he looks biologically older than his dad, but he is a great god of smiths and runes, and they look to him for anything that requires crafts. He is generally the one that is prayed to. Hygrin the Horned One, third child of Magnus with Turid, only daughter. She had some bestial traits, deer's horns and cloven hooves and things like that. She was very drawn to the woods. She is the goddess of the wood, in fact, and she manages forest spirits, going where she can to prevent things from getting too out of hand. Magnus had different plans for her and constantly meddles in her affairs, creating a lot of work for her, but she continues to be estranged from her family. Brokir is the youngest of Magnus' 4 children with Turid. There were several lesser deities that were sacrificed in order to imbue him with immunity to elements, both physical and magical. So you can see there's some clear parallelism with a certain other Norse god that's probably very popular to the gaming society. But that's, he became, again, very estranged from his family for this decision, because he was denied the greatest pleasures that come from physical sensation. So now he just wanders. He is considered the god of travelers. And then a couple other gods that were actually initially around when things were going on with the old ones. Fel is Magnus' cousin. This is sort of a parallel with Hades. Fel was kind of the lesser, but he had this presence about him that Magnus understood and felt that he would be perfect for a certain job. It's essentially one of the most important jobs other than ruling over the living domain. He gave him the realm of the dead, Fel's hold. Fel became the god of death, and he just metes out punishments to those who die and are denied the halls of Magnus Reach, which is basically Valhalla. And yeah, he just kind of handles that. But so it's a little bit of parallels with Hades there. Saer is another one of the gods who was originally raised by the last old one. He was a boatsman and chartist way back in the day, and he was responsible for getting them around several different places, the majority of the gods and their followers, the men that they had. He also fought a very powerful being, an old one called the Lord of the Deeps, and it was about a fourth of the size of the world that lived below the waves, and he was able to defeat it in single combat. Don't ask how. Things happen. And he became a god for, of course, of the waves and seas, as one might expect with someone who defeated a monster one-fourth the size of the world. Sphella. Sphella was, again, one of the original gods raised to godhood. She fought a being that would cause an eclipse when it took to the skies, one of the old ones. And then by pinning its wings behind its back and cratered it into the world, it became a landmass, its corpse, as the corpse did not rot. And thus she became the goddess of wind and weather. She flies on favorable and unfavorable skies. Freydis, goddess of fertility, Magnus' ex-wife, gave birth to the very land which players walk on in the game. And she was one of the original gods as well. Nerissa is her child, more or less. She provided Magnus with 3 children as well, and as we discussed in the background, they're both estranged. She's a very catching woman, very beautiful. Not the strongest of gods, but stronger than your average mortal man, as of course she is a god. And then her children are Sigrun. Sigrun is the Lady of Wisdom and Prophecy. This is the first child between Freydis and Magnus. She was disabled and blind, so she is she's not able to walk and she cannot see, but she has exceptional hearing and she has a great memory. She has an absolute sort of memory. So she is very broken. She has to be helped around often by her brother, Gear. But she has visions. She can memorize any bit of information, and she left with her mother. She's also considered the goddess of knowledge and learning because, again, she is the epitome of it. She understands many great things, and many things in the world that have long been forgotten if she's heard them before, and it's just lock and key in the brain. Gear, second child, and really his firstborn son, as I see my typos here. I have to fix it now that I've seen it. I'm sure there are more, but I had to fix that. So his firstborn son, and just to clarify things, these are all the children that the last old one was prophesizing. The last old one stayed within Magnus' court for a while until he began to see Magnus fall victim to his own desires, and tried to set him on the right path by providing this guidance, these prophecies, to say, hey, you gotta do this. If you don't do this, or if you do this, then bad things will happen. And he was drunk and uncouth, forced himself upon Freydis, and then what is essentially a rape is the birth of Sigrun. For Gear, Magnus, Magnus was told by the last old one that he should recognize what he had at his side and not what lay too far ahead. Magnus ignored his counsel and began to spread his seed. His second-born son was born farsighted and could not see close to him, so he had trouble at learning really anything simple, or reading, or even seeing faces, because his farsight is so severe that his near vision is terrible. But he became a very good good with javelins and bows and ranged weaponry. And again, a lot of the children understand. They've been told what happened, and they blame Magnus for what occurred. But he became a god of scouts and exploration, as you can see from far away. Lastly, second son of Magnus and Freydis, and the last child. Last old one prophesied that the next child Magnus would have be everything he wanted, but would be cursed with his father's rage for all eternity, and failed to heed the words of the last old one the final time, and thus born was Ulf. Ulf is a wolf on both legs, and though he had all the proper traits that one would want from a potential successor, wisdom, power, strength, he looked hideous, and when he's enraged, it's like something clicks, basically going feral. Uh, Ulf is actually fairly important because he actually has developed into a major god against a lesser faction of basically sub culture within humanity called the Wolfkin, and he is basically worshipped as their only god. He's considered the god of beasts, and he felt disconnected and unloved by his father. And then, of course, there are lesser deities. And that was a sort of a cop-out in the event that other people wanted, well, could I be this god? Maybe perhaps this guy. So far, it hasn't been an issue, but I wouldn't mind doing it. So, races feels appropriate. So yeah, your humans, pretty standard. Your Norisicans, martial. A lot of simple living. There are obviously wise men and things like that, but most people are pretty simple living and just kind of do, just kind of do what needs to be done to live on the day to day. Occasionally advances are made, but a lot of stuff's pretty static here because people like their way of life. You got your demigods. This is basically, obviously half god blood, half human blood. And they seek, typically they seek full godhood as a result of their deeds or just a glorious life. They tend to live a little bit longer than the average person. Things like that. Dwarfir, your dwarfs, small humanoids, tinkering, crafting, jeweling. They have a lot of temples that are around. They essentially disappeared. They were known even before the old ones to exist. I'm not really sure. A lot of people think the old ones wiped them out. They were known to have been here. Their temples are much, much older. People remember their temples from back in the day. Gods recall their temples from back when the old ones existed, so they predated the old ones. And I'm kind of letting Bo, who worked his way into playing a Dwarfir, kind of tell more about their history and give them characterization within reason, as long as it makes sense. So I expect more characterization there, as I'm letting everyone kind of do characterization and make things happen in the world, because that's the point of this. Wolfkin, mentioned them offhand, but they're called the Ulfdrei, or Wolf's Blood. Gifted with incredible strength and speed, suffer from an obvious appearance. So they're basically analogs to werewolves, werekin, skin wolves from Warhammer, things like that. They're just beastmen that they always look like werewolves. They don't even get to be human during the daytime. They are shunned most of the time because of their appearance and the occasional outburst that it's the epitome of a few bad apples spoil the bunch, because if only a few wolfkin go nuts, then they're very, very dangerous. And they're typically treated as no less than beasts in some parts of Norisica. They're believed to have been brought into the world with the birth of Ulf and the split of Magnus and Freydis. So Ulf is essentially the patron god of Wolfkin. So then we have the Alfs. These are forest spirits. This is your general term for forest spirits and everything like that in Norisica. Though there are actual humanoid elves that just look like elves, essentially, that keep to themselves, stay in the woods, and just are typically fairly xenophobic, but they don't seek war. They just want to live in peace among their woodland lands. But then Norisicans also refer to all forest spirits as Alfs, even though the humanoid ones try to distance themselves from such spirits. The spirits are fickle and unpredictable, and they can either be fairly harmless or dangerous, extremely. And then what sort of Norisican setting with potentially undead would be? What kind of Norisican setting would it be without Droger, without undead, honored dead that rise again? This simple, the dead made living. These are old Norisicans that have long perished throughout the years and built tombs and burrows and barrows and most of the time, again, they haven't been seen for a long time since Fel became the god of death, because he keeps all that in check. But as you might recall, if you've watched the first session, then you would know that kind of made a bit of a comeback in the Deadwood. Fitting. And then places, and that should be pretty much it. Obviously, I'll be happy to answer any other questions in the comment section if I didn't cover anything. Magnus Reach, that's going to be, let's bring this up. Magnus Reach is right here in the middle. That's pretty much the home of the gods. It is protected by magical means, so you're not able to sail there and roll up and take pictures or anything. It is not a tourist spot, and if you happen to pass through the dangers of sailing, which is basically just rocks all over the place and some magical barriers and creatures, then you have the spirits of Magnus Holt, which are all the mightiest warriors that have perished in battle and combat, distinguished themselves. You have the best and brightest that have ever existed, spread out throughout the island, and they defend it from people who get on its shores. So it's probably best not to go there, unless you have good reason to, or if you're invited. Famar is the western island. Many jarls and a few petty kings there. A fair bit of war, constantly trying to impress the gods, expand their realms. There's a lot of martial prowess on display here. Dying Wood is kind of up here in this area, and it's very foggy and dour and dark there. It's not natural. Far, far south is the Brightwood. That's where the elves live. And then all of this in between those two is split up between Jarls and Petty Kings. Freyhofen, southeast. Fittingly, this is Freydis' territory. It was not initially called Freyhofen, but it is now. Then there's the Wintry Wood. Very, very harsh, even for the rest of the setting. And they consider themselves outcasts, the people that live there, who have followed their goddess and the gods that followed her. They are called the Children of the Mother in that region, and they are very, very xenophobic. They've also begun to integrate themselves into the wild to work alongside forest spirits. It's a very eerie and strange and deadly place for those who are not of good intent with Freydis. Dorfirheim, island to the northeast. This has the most Dorfir ruins of any island. It is absolutely filled with Dorfir ruins. This appears to be their initial stronghold. Obviously, there are some pockets around here, maybe even some down here, but most of the Dorfir ruins are in this area, spread out even among the islands, underground, on the seas. It's a land of untold treasure, but the Dorfir did not play around when they built their home defenses, so there are traps and constructs and steamworks things everywhere. It's a very, very dangerous place. But Norisicans want glory and treasure. They sail here all the time, and most of the time never come back. And lastly, we've got the Endless Snow, which is my border here. Everything around it. And unseen on the sides, but it does exist. It is a circle of snow people had tried to push through. None have ever returned. There are tons of stories about this. It freezes the water in men's eyes, and if you tried to piss, then your piss becomes an icicle. No one knows what is beyond this snow. So then the places. So I've covered places, gods, and races. And then also give that brief history. If there are any more detailed questions, I'm happy to answer them, or anything I didn't cover that people are curious about. Again, happy to speak more about them. But that's basically the gist of it. I'm just kind of letting players have their effect on the world and kind of adapting from that. Obviously, I'm introducing more as we're going along, but I didn't want to invest a ton of. I want to allow players to sort of shape what has happened in a way, because I feel like there's a lot more involved in that. It's like the Dorfir, with Bo, with his character and his characterization of Mem, kind of gives an idea of what Dorfir might have been like. or maybe it does. Maybe he's an outcast. You know, it's hard to know, but it does kind of give an insight. The way that the wolf can act, the way that Sylvie acts, basically the way that characters interact with the world and behave around the world. This kind of creates more than if I just say this is the way things are, act it like it, you know. So I like to, I don't want to say be hands off. I like to obviously still get involved in world building and things like that, but I like to build a setting with some meat, and then let the players put some more toppings on it to sort of expand on what the system and setting is like. Because I feel like if you're just handed a pile of something, you don't really, it's not as big of an investment if you have a hand in creating it. But that's basically it, and I've talked for 30 minutes and hopefully achieved something. But I want to thank you guys for sitting with me through that. And again, if anyone has any questions about the setting, just go ahead and put comments below. And I will be happy to answer them. Alright, thanks guys. Take care. And thanks for watching another B&B production. Later.